Welcome to the Extra Time Podcast, where you'll hear sports stories you might not have heard about from people you might not have heard of. Let's get into this week's show.
Hello and welcome back in to the Extra Time Podcast, and it's a very happy show. We've got a new guest for the first time, and a lot has happened in the week since the last episode, since you last joined us. So you'll see beside me, Extra Time Zone, Simone Wern is with me alongside Mark Woods. I'm your host, Aidan Box, and well, a lot has happened in the last week. But, Woodsy, I've got some more props this week because I always back myself. And they've done it. Got this from my very loving auntie, all Brisbane fans, my mum's side of the family, and the Lions have done it. I told you North couldn't win the flag. Congratulations to Brisbane, they've won the AFLW Premiership in 2023.
I spoke in the weeks leading up that if North Melbourne won the flag, we would have to source a North Melbourne jumper, scarf, and you've done it. Well done. You were right, they couldn't, no, they didn't, but I don't necessarily think they couldn't have won it. But well done on being right this time.
And someone else that was sending through those kangaroos and giving me a bit of stick in the last 4 weeks, which was getting to me at some point, so I was a bit unsure. But Simone, welcome finally to the podcast. It's great to have you and a really good contributor to Extra Time, so welcome to the show.
Boxy and Woodsy, a pleasure. I've been following the podcast over the past few months and have loved it. I must say I was on the Rebel Sport website during the week, just having a quick look at what it would cost me to kit you out in the North gear, but unfortunately wasn't to be a fantastic grand final though over the weekend. An
absolute belter. So Brisbane obviously running out winners, a big final quarter in the end. Taking it out in the end, 4-3-27 North, scoreless final term, 7-2-44 Brisbane. So 17-point win to the Lions. They finally get that premiership, Woodsy. They'd gone about 0-5 this year between all the codes. Quite unbelievable luck there. But the AFLW version of Brisbane's national team got the job done. And it was that final quarter, really. North Melbourne had dominated the first three, and the wheels all fell off in the fourth. I just felt like it wasn't their sort of game. They went into that game, as you would, as any coach would coach their players to do. You'd say, lock the game up, especially for how low scoring and how valuable goals are in the AFLW game. Lock it up, make sure they don't score, try and just keep it in our forward half for the 17 minutes, and we've won the premiership. And they just looked a bit worried, and they were always in danger, I thought, doing that and playing that sort of mode against a team that's been there before. They were there last year. They wanted that, revenge, not against North, obviously, but they wanted that premiership after they got one in 21. So it was very dangerous for them, and it was on the edge. They were doing quite well for about the first 5 minutes of the quarter, locking it up, stoppage after stoppage. The pressure was immense. Pressure didn't leave, but just the experienced heads of Brisbane to be able to just throw, hell to leather and bring that tackling pressure that's probably the best in the comp, has been all year, and really run over the top. And it was their senior players. And I mean, we discussed this during the week. The story was Dakota Davidson, how important she is. If she doesn't play, are Brisbane any chance? And in the end, she did, and she was the exact reason they won, really. 2 goals in the final quarter. I think she had less than 5 disposals before that, and really was just the catalyst of Brisbane's final quarter run.
She was, and we did talk about this last week. When I heard she was out, I picked North just simply because she changes the game. I mean, she averaged 1.9 goals per game and was sitting at the top with Zanka from Melbourne for season 8. And I heard the commentary team on the weekend, actually, a good friend of the show, Dr. Sam Duncan, talking about the fact that Davidson's a little bit like a Charlie Cameron type player, not necessarily in stature, but in the fact that, a couple of disposals and she kicks a few goals and changes the game. And I think that happened on the weekend. North dominated that game for 3 quarters. I thought they were in the box seat. I was actually out watching the Melbourne Aces on the weekend, tuning into the commentary and thought they've got the game done and dusted here. And it was a brilliant contest. And then North just got, they were taken out in that last quarter. And I say props to Brisbane, as you said, experienced outfit. They've been there before. They've got a great leadership team and obviously a great high performance sort of leadership crew up there with the men's program and the women's program. So, there's a lot to love about what Brisbane are doing, but I don't think we'll we'll see the end of North up at the top of the ladder. And I think the last few weeks, and particularly that finals series, has given them confidence. It's given them somewhere to propel them forward for 2024.
And they'd hate it. And I was watching the post-game presentations, and all the North girls are sitting, and I hate watching that because I've been there. It's horrific. Probably one of the worst things you can experience, seeing the opposition team get their medals, and Bree Conan and, coach, all the other leadership players, the presenters, all they were saying is, well done, North, you'll be back here next year, I'm sure. And you hate hearing that on the day. But it's so true, because that's the reason they didn't lose the game. They had that gap. They hadn't beaten the grand final before. Now they have. So now next year, we see just from the season to the finals, we saw their improvement in one-score games late in the fourth quarter. During the season, they lost that heartbreak to Adelaide. And then in the prelim, they got over the top of Adelaide by a point. So they've improved, in that month or two. Obviously, they're going to improve in a season. If we see them in the grand final next year, they'll have that little bit more experience. And I think the tide will be turned a little bit, and they'll, at least score in the final quarter, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at it from the aspect of, looking at the previous premiers. There's Adelaide, Western Bulldogs, Adelaide, Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane. So I'm waiting to see the cracks start to appear on teams like North Melbourne can win it, and the other teams that I haven't listed to actually be fighting for that top four spot and then on to the grand final. It's a shame they didn't win it, because it would have been great to see another team win it, but it's showing that the competition is there. And I think I did say at the start of the season that it would be the 4 prelim finalists were the teams to beat. Now, North Melbourne, you rated them the tier below, but it's one of those things where I think it does actually highlight that they might have just been that experience from the Brisbane who won in 2021, that pressure, and wasn't actually much to them because they've been there before.
And it's such a big factor, and you can watch a grand final in pretty much any sport. The best players and the most experienced players win games, not because they've played more games, but because they know that they don't have to dominate in the first quarter. They don't have to dominate in the second or the third. They know the game is won in the final 10 minutes of the game, especially in a grand final, barring those one-sided games, which you don't see too often. And they know that as long as they can take the game by the scruff of the neck in the last 15 minutes, their team will win every single time. And that's exactly what Davidson did. I mentioned not many touches before that, 2 massive goals in the final term. And Bree Conan, I mean, it was Luke Hodge-like as a Hawthorn supporter, from the start of the game to the finish, just patrolling the defence, setting up, Brisbane drives, whether it was trying to score or just control the ball. Final quarter, the way that she led that team is quite remarkable. And talk about a captain's game, 19 disposals, 7 marks, 10 tackles, 2 clearances, and obviously that goal at the end, which you could say unrequired because they probably would have won anyway, but how good was the celebrations after that? If you haven't seen it, make sure you go and watch it. They absolutely love their skipper, and you can see why. It was just a mega performance. And so 2 other, Hampson as well, who looked really in the first 3 quarters. Ali Hampson and Dakota Davidson, they were trying to push up the ground a little bit. They didn't really do much, and it looked like Brisbane could not score. North Melbourne's defence was outstanding. Ferguson, again, just dominating, and then in the final quarter, it looked a little bit like Ferguson had spent all their petrol tickets, and the other 2 just knew that they just got to wait it out and wait for that final 15, and that's when we control the airway. That's when they bring the ball to ground. That's what they did. They got their smalls involved, and all of a sudden, Brisbane looked like Brisbane. They looked really potent, and they're able to get over the line. So it probably does hurt a little bit more that North, dominated. And even all the way up to 3-quarter time, they kicked, 2 goals late in the third to 1 goal in the third term. And they led by 7, which you probably think anyone else, if it had been, Melbourne, those teams that had been there before, Adelaide, Brisbane were probably in trouble. But being North, and it probably was in their heads a little bit, we've got to seal this. We've got to lock this down. We can't play attacking like we have been all game. And that change in mode probably cost them in the end because Brisbane just kept playing like Brisbane, and the only thing that they had to fix up was that ball use going forward and their forwards being more potent, and that's exactly what happened. And so Yeah, that was a real shock for me because I was with all of you guys and I was actually watching the game and I had, my massive calls and predictions on the line and I was really worried when Jazz Garner kicked her second goal. I was like, this is it. I'm booking her in for the medal and, she'll be holding the cup at the end of the day. So sometimes it shocks you, but it's just such a sure thing that experienced players are going to see the game out and they're always going to be there at the end.
I think one of the biggest factors is that I've just looked at some of the stats, and the biggest thing that actually highlighted to me was there's 4 players with over 10 tackles for the game, and they're all from Brisbane. So Courtney Hodder had 18 tackles.
I want to highlight that too because that's usually, and I highlighted her last show, pre-grand final, saying if she bobs up and kicks a goal, it's probably going to be the most crucial goal of the game. She didn't kick a goal. She missed her only shot.
I think the 18 tackles were
she
the
had
crucial
11,
factor. 18
tackles, and she was doing that in defence. As a forward, she was getting down into defence at desperate times. So massive, massive game. You're right. That slipped my mind, but and she was everywhere. She might not have had the football, but she was everywhere as well.
So 53 tackles combined from 4 players. I think Courtney Hodder, Isabel Dawes with 13, Ellie Anderson with 12, and Brianna Conan with 10. Like that right there. Only players with above 10, and it just goes to show you that the pressure actually does. Defensive pressure, tackling pressure actually does win games.
Well,
there was 180 for the match.
Sorry to interrupt you, Boxy. I was just going to say that it is really interesting looking. I think we all knew the experience of Brisbane was there, but there's this engine room for North, from defence through the midfield with Carney, Riddell, Garner. And we saw that early, and I think we all thought if North's engine room can get going and can play really good footy for 4 quarters, then they can beat that experience. And they did it for 3 quarters.
Almost did.
But that's I was looking at the stats, and if you flip it on the other side, Woodsy, and look at what maybe didn't go well, Riddell had the most time on the ground she's had all season in a game. She played 85% of the game. And had 20 disposals. For a lot of players, that's a lot of disposals. But for her, it was the lowest amount of disposals she's had in any game this season. She had 22 against Geelong in round 3, but 20 is her lowest.
Yeah, and
her average disposal is 29.8 for the season. So when you cut that by a third, and significant.
I'll look at another stat. I'm just looking at and highlighting these stats. So metres gained, 4 players over 300.
And those going back on the tackles, and they were saying this all broadcast, how high the tackle count was going to be. They were almost going, they said we might get to 100 by the 3rd term. And in the end, Brisbane 109, North 75. So over 180 tackles for the game.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a scorching hot day, but it was pretty warm. So that is, absolute pressure cooker. And obviously a team so fresh to a stage like that, to pressure like that, you're not going to back them too many times. Something special is probably going to happen. Jazz Garner really tried to bring that out.
I think Jazz Garner, as I mentioned with the metres gained, she had 104 more metres gained than second. So she had 452. And then the next three were Brisbane players. But it's like I think you can get metres gained, but how effective were her disposals? Obviously, not watching the game, I don't know, but that's just the stat that stood out to me was 452 and 100 more than second.
Well, I mentioned last week it was, Kobe and Shaq, LeBron and D-Wade sort of partnership with Garner and Riddell. On the weekend, although Riddell had a lot of time around the ground, she attended a lot of stoppages. Her disposal wasn't great, so it was a bit of a, all of it's on Shaq. All of it's on one of them, and it was because Garner's game was simply almost as good as you can have for a losing grand final for someone. The 2 goals, then they weren't easy goals, pretty long shots, and I mean the first one was just North to a T. I just think that they knew they were so well planned, and you keep saying, and I feel for them. I might have been supporting Brisbane, but. You feel for them because they were so well prepared. They played the perfect first 3 quarters, and that was shown by the way that they weren't bombing the ball. And they could have just bombed the ball up to Randall because she's a superstar and she controls the air. But they didn't because they knew that Conan and the Brisbane defence have it set up so well. So that first goal that Garner kicked was just a little short kick just inside 50, about 40 metres out, and she was able to kick a really crucial goal. And that happened again. She was everywhere. She had a quiet first 10 minutes of the game, and then she just absolutely turned it on. I don't know what her clearance numbers were, but 2 goals, and just every time it felt like she got the clearance, she'd not only follow it up, but she'd make sure they ended up with at least a deep inside 50 or a score. That's the sort of player she is. And I just think if they were to have, played that fourth quarter out, she'd have 2 medals around her neck. But a great performance. And again, it was that thing I was calling for at the start of the finals. And, when I said last week, are they complete? That's probably the one thing they need. It's just when the pressure's really, really on. They obviously were burnt out from beating, the top, Melbourne, Adelaide throughout the finals. But when the pressure's that high, they need players around them to come to the party again. Yeah. And it can't just be Jazz. I mean, Jazz Garner, phenomenal player, but no team can really do that. And they saw that, Anne Hatchard the same in the prelim. Tried everything. Marinoff wasn't having her best game. They don't get it done. The players towards the end of the lineup aren't having their best game either. Something I've got to highlight because her first half was just scintillating how dominant and how easily the ball was coming in. Randall went goalless, which was I would not have predicted that if I was you're making a multi or whatever like people do, be straight at the top. Just the one behind. 4 disposals for Talia Randall. And
I think it goes to
2 marks.
I think it goes to show, though, that I'm looking at 2 areas, stoppages and defence. Defence was easily won by Lions, as you said, 109 to 75 tackles. And stoppages, though, was clearly won by North Melbourne. So it was 56 to 36 hitouts, 42 to 24 clearances, 10 to 2 in centre clearances, and 32 to 22 in stoppage clearances. So it goes to show that the defensive nature of Brisbane was actually the thing that counteracted that stoppage. I guess it was a domination by North Melbourne.
And it's so risky. I mean, it looks so risky, but that's just the nature of a good team, a good experienced team. They back the way they play. And throughout the broadcast, they were saying Brisbane's actually happy for North to win the ball first because they back their tackling pressure in. They back that they'll spill the ball when North get possession and counter off it. And it was the same. Emma King was dominating the air in the first 3 quarters. And, Davidson, Hampson, they couldn't get involved. And, they had a few players injured throughout the game. They were all able to come back on, Brisbane. But they were like, you can have that. You can have that ball. You can have that possession. You can go and run and you can get the ball on the outside. We'll allow you to have that because we back our defence. We back our pressure in. And it paid off for them in the end because they just kept backing it. And they never once shied away from the way they play. And they've got a premiership out of it. So, well done to them. I think the biggest thing for me that killed it for North Melbourne was, I talked her up. I can't remember what I called her last week, but, Jenna Bruton going down in the first 5 minutes. And after that prelim that she had, obviously 28 disposals, I think it was, and just not really seeing much of the game at all. I was actually really, really heartbroken and disappointed to not see the way that Jenna Bruton would have played out that game because the form she was in, she's the perfect backup to that superstar midfield with Garner and Riddell. And immediately, all the talk was how they're going to cover that through the midfield. They've lost that rotation through there. And obviously they were tired by the end of it. Like I said, they've come up against some pretty big midfields the last few weeks before it. And not only the being tuckered, they were without a real game changer inside and outside the way she plays the game. So that was really disappointing. And it was just such a nothing injury as well. She sort of just went to go and chase. She made a really good spoil, and she was really on to make the intercept possession and drive the ball back inside 50. And her foot just didn't go with her. Unfortunately, had to get carried off and miss the rest of the game in the first quarter. So really unfortunate for her. But, that's footy. These things happen. Brisbane were able to just see the game out, back themselves for 4 quarters. And I think if you do that, you play the game out your way, at some point it'll come into your favour and reward you. And last year it didn't for them, and that pained them a lot. This year it did. What a remarkable final series it was. What a season it was. Certainly the best I've seen. some of the games in the finals, you just feel like sitting back and watching them back because you won't be disappointed. But that's it. Brisbane, premiers once again of the AFLW. But what were your guys' takeaways from, I guess, this season? Another year with 18 teams, some more successful than others.
I think Sydney's rise. I could say Saints almost making the finals, but Sydney going winless last year, 2 making finals and making a semi, losing to Adelaide in the end. But I mean, a team that goes winless to making finals is an extraordinary effort. Obviously, Chloe Malloy, big recruit there to bring a different type of leadership. But I think having one of the expansion sides up on the rise has been a standout for me.
I agree with you, and I think when they signed Chloe Malloy, the first thing I thought was I didn't actually think about Collingwood and the loss they were going to feel. I thought this is a brilliant decision from a marketing perspective to grow, the name of their women's program up there, but to lead, and I think to be out of Melbourne, out of that bubble a little bit, probably helped her. She's had a few injuries and has struggled the last few seasons. She was great, but I'm sort of going the other way here, and I don't like to sound negative. I think that might be my entry into this podcast, Boxy, but I think some of the bigger clubs, particularly the Melbourne-based clubs, have to be thanking Sydney and thanking, Mon Conti and Richmond for the things they're doing, because it's like we've forgotten that Collingwood, Carlton, even the Bulldogs to an extent, have really just been disappointing. And it's not just this season. If you look at Carlton, for example, I mean, we follow footy, and our listeners, I'm sure, follow footy pretty closely in Melbourne. 2023 12th Carlton, 2022 14th. 2021 they were 8th, which was outside the finals because there was the top 6 in that season. Let go Daniel Harford a couple of seasons ago. Where to for Carlton is my question. And Collingwood, I mean, there's an expectation for Carlton and Collingwood and the like that they're going to play finals footy. So why aren't we talking about the fact that they're nowhere near that? And what's going to be the catalyst for change there?
I think you actually, with Collingwood at least, you raised the issue by talking about Sydney. Chloe Malloy, there's one. Steph Chiocci, that's 2. Lambert, that's 3. 3 big names right there. So I think that would have affected...
And they were still in the finals race with a couple of rounds to go.
But it's just like losing the players and the players moving. I think that would change the dynamics of a team. Only for Collingwood. I can't say the others. I don't know too much of their list dynamics, but it is interesting that the competition is still growing, and it's like the turning of the wheel is you're going to get it's a quick drop off, and I think for Collingwood at least that's been displayed in the sense of losing players and not being able to get people to step up to the plate because they're big shoes to fill.
I think too.
But they were still able to beat teams. Like they went up to Brisbane and beat Brisbane. They were able to beat teams in the 8 that were sitting in there. And to me, that shows you how important it is to have success in both men's and women's teams at the club. Because you see how well Brisbane are doing. They lost the men's grand final by a couple of points. But Fags was there. Harris Andrews was at Icon. They're all at Icon on the weekend because it's just as important. They're all one club, and I love how they've added that trophy in now because it encourages the clubs to be better because they make each other better. And I don't care how much you think that's right or wrong. I think they really do make each other better. And Collingwood lost those key names at the start of the AFLW season. They weren't playing for them anymore, but it didn't matter because their men had come off such a high. The culture is so good there, and talking to Geordie Allen, she was saying all this stuff. The culture is so good; they just wanted to win as well because it's expected, and they know doesn't matter who's out on the park for them. They weren't even thinking about that anymore. They respect Chloe and all of that, but they're like the program is in such a good spot now. You've got to make it count, which is why you look at teams like Carlton and you're like, well, their men's teams They weren't great a couple of years ago, but now they are. So why hasn't their women's team experienced the same thing? Because it's the same club. And Brisbane, there's no wonder. Like, Brisbane's been good for the last 5 or 6 years in both, because they're just, you can see that. And we're, half a country away from Brisbane, but you can just feel how good the vibe is at both teams. Like, they're one of those clubs. And I think the teams at the bottom of both leagues, the more that they connect with each other, support each other, and try and up the culture, the quicker they'll transition. I think North are probably pretty close to doing that, because like their men's team, they're pretty low, like they're pretty much as low as you can get, bar West Coast. But all their men go to all the women's games. They're always doing things with each other, sort of thing. So I think that might be a key. At the end of the day, you still got to go out and win those games of footy. And I'll never forget the first ever game of AFLW that I watched. It was Carlton, and it was talked up. It was like, Carlton's a massive club. Now they've got a women's team. How good's this going to be? It's going to lift the whole club. It's going to lift the men. And the men ended up lifting themselves. And the women's team hasn't achieved much, which is weird.
Well, they were runners-up in 2019. So when you're saying they haven't achieved much, it's just you look at the teams that have actually won the premierships. And Adelaide, the standout with 3.
But I think that's what I'm saying, Woodsy. Like, I disagree with what Boxy's saying, because it's all well and good to say, well, Collingwood were in the mix. Collingwood were in the hunt. I mean, Collingwood and the big AFL clubs, success is... We look at success as premierships.
Yeah.
Collingwood, where are the premierships for their women? I mean, that we've been talking about their women's program. Chiocci's a big name. She's been around women's football for forever and a day. And there's a number of other players. Like... where are their women's premierships? Like, why are we sitting here saying, like, if their men's team were in the hunt, we won a few games and they didn't make it, we'd be up in arms. Well,
they're pretty lucky.
Not me. I'm a 25-year Hawthorn member, just to throw it out there. But
they're pretty lucky.
People would be asking, and so what I'm sort of saying
There's
is,
no
I understand development of the league. We're giving them time, and I'm on that wagon. I agree with that, but when does the expectation change for the Women's League, where we expect premiership success, and we won't allow that not to be the case? We want answers from our players, from our high performance staff, from our leadership. I mean, we're on the hunt for a new coach at Collingwood, so I know that's the start, but I'm really intrigued about 2024, because
it's interesting.
I think this is the premiership window. I think for AFLW teams too is smaller.
Oh, definitely.
Because there's growth in participation for young girls, and over the next 5, 6, 7 years, all the girls who come into the AFLW programs would have been playing footy their whole life. Whereas at the moment, you've got a sprinkling of girls who've been playing for 10, 15 years, but the rest are 3, 4 years into a career. So when you've got that window, you've got to take that opportunity. And if you don't, it might be a while until you get that again.
I think it's also, you look at the men's side when you're talking about what's the expectation. I can ask you both as Hawthorn fans, what's your expectation? Is a premiership the expectation next year? Or is it further development to, I guess...
finals in the next 2 years, yes.
Yeah, so
well, but we're in a different position because we've got a cabinet full of premiership cups. So I don't think you can really compare that. As a Hawthorn supporter at the moment, I know that we're rebuilding because we've had that dynasty where we won 4 premierships in the space of a really short period of time. So I'm under no illusions it's going to take a few more years for us to be in the hunt for a premiership. But I think it's hard to compare that when you haven't been winning any.
Okay, so then
it's a bit like they're just washing everybody with rose-coloured glasses, I think, a little bit, the AFLW. I don't want to be critical, but
I think
nothing bad. Clubs don't get criticised, like they do in most sports. And you're right, Simone. Collingwood should have got ripped. They lost, crucial games at the end of the season. They should have played finals and they should have gone deep because that's the sort of club that they are. They had the players for it. And in the end, everyone's like, oh, well, they had injuries. Slisher was injured. Oh, well. The men's team's just won the premiership. Their club has never been in a better position since, maybe 2018.
But the AFLW is more like...
They bummed out. And I will have to... I do think that they club, they should bring the negative stuff to light a bit more, but they don't because it's developing, and that's okay. I don't mind. They can run their league how they want, but that's my thoughts of why they just like to say how good's all of this. And I think the fact that the reason Collingwood and a few other teams that were just out of it, the Saints, didn't make the 8, was some pretty remarkable things happened. Like, obviously, Sydney had that run where they played, in 4 different states in a row, won all those games, which one of the first teams I've seen do that so well and so candidly. Essendon, finishing 5th, staying on that form, pretty hot form. Geelong the same, because Geelong weren't in the 8 until the last month and a half. They jumped in there, so it did take some pretty awesome stuff, which did get a lot of the attention. But at the same time, I think everyone's got to get their attention. I mean, the Dogs got it for a lot of the season, which they deserve because they've been a successful team. They've been up there and going winless, and you could probably almost call it winless for the year. No disrespect to West Coast, but that was a game that, I mean, if the Dogs had have lost that, they would have had to have been talked about. They were talked about a bit, but only because of the stats. I think there should have been a bit more of what is actually going on here at the Bulldogs, like seriously, But the teams in the middle, just because they got knocked out by Sydney's incredible run, they weren't really talked about because it was incredible, fair enough. But yeah, I think you're right. I think as they go forward, we probably should or we will see more negativity actually talked about a bit more because sometimes it's good. Positive bullying is good sometimes.
Well, I disagree in some respects because of there's so many elements to it. I can go that like the AFLW is more like EPL in terms of the teams that are good will stay good for a longer period of time, like Adelaide, like Brisbane, like Melbourne, because the expansion was hastened. There's dilution of a talent pool where, as you're saying, in 8 years' time, there'll be people that are brought up solely who have played football, been in that environment, and they'll be great in 8 years' time.
They'll be better than the best players in the competition.
Yeah. So the talent will evolve. However, right now, because of it was I can't remember how many teams, 10 teams, and then it pushed to 18 in a space of only a few years without the ability for that development to actually take place in terms of those coming up. It sees teams will suffer unless you're able to capitalise. I think Essendon and Sydney are the two teams that they're both only in their second season, correct me if I'm wrong in that, and they're playing finals. Where, Bulldogs, they have been a mainstay. Carlton, Collingwood have been mainstays of the competition. They've suffered because their players, I've named 3 of them, but for other clubs as well, their players have gone elsewhere because of the expansion. So you can't really equate it to the AFL and going, well, the expectation is a premiership because they've got premierships when the AFLW has only been around 8 seasons and you're looking at it going, well, why haven't we got a premiership in our cabinet when you look at the teams? Adelaide have 3, Brisbane have 2. So there's been 3 other teams that have gone. So I don't think the expectation for a premiership is necessarily viable in the AFLW just yet, unless you are the top 4 teams. I just don't.
I think it's the mark's got to be the second last weekend of the year then. So Geelong make it this year, and I think, and this is, I know that you asked me who can win the premiership. It's a completely different question, so I'm not going to just go back on what I said. I'm saying something completely different here. I reckon there was 11 teams this year that possibly could have made the second last week if everything went right. And there is a bit of an if there, but I do think Collingwood were good enough. They finished 11th. Richmond, they flogged them in the last round of the year. They had the best player in the competition this year. Obviously, they could probably have made the second last week. And then St Kilda, again, pretty unlucky because of what happened just above them. Same thing. I watched a few of their games this year. Mostly, all their good games were at home. They struggled a little bit on the road. But I think they could have made it as well. So that's where we were talking about premiership window before. It might be smaller, but in terms of how many people can be in it, it's a massive window. I think next year, you can go really far down and say a lot of these teams can be in it next year. It's just whether it's staying in it might be a bit tough, especially with what's going to happen in the next few years with the draft. But I think because of that, because of how amazing the talent's going to be and how strong these girls are going to be physically, but then successfully, I think the window is massive in terms of how many teams will be in the window at one time, which is awesome for the competition, because then the race for the 8 becomes absolutely thrilling. And it was thrilling this year.
Do you think that's because of the amount of games? Like, there's only 10 for the home and away season. Do you actually think that plays a factor in the amount of teams that actually can... I mean, there's 11 teams you said that could have played into the second last week. Well, is that a factor? Do you think more games actually mean that number will decrease?
Well, it does take out the fact that, because a lot of it with 10 games is obviously luck of fixture.
Yeah.
I don't want to, might sound like it's an excuse or you're sooking if you, have a tough fixture, but it is real. It's a thing. Luck with fixture, luck with stringing lucky results. Like, Sydney had a bit of luck at the end of the year, finding really good form on the road. In a longer season, you got to carry that over for a bit more, so less becomes about luck and more about how good actually are you. So sure, I think that will make a massive difference. But Brisbane won the premiership from 4th. Geelong made the prelim from 6th. The Saints barely missed out, and the clubs that, down to Carlton, who I don't really rate, I think genuinely, could have made a run in the finals, and that's exactly what you want from the comp, and it's only going to get more spread out. So
absolutely, and look, you make a good point, Woodsy, and I love AFLW. I follow it. I'm a member at Hawthorn. I watch a lot of the games across the course of the season, and I write a few articles about some of the data. And
make sure you catch those on Extra Time.
I am really interested in it, and I understand that's a developing league, but I still question why 8 seasons in we're not looking more at the bigger clubs that have expectation in the men's program, and yet we don't expect it in the women's. And that's a question that our listeners might be able to provide some feedback on. But I know we need to sort of start to finish up this chat and move on, but I'm really keen next year. Collingwood, Carlton, the Bulldogs obviously finished 18th. They'll have a new coach. Even the likes of GWS, who've been around a long time, they finished 16th. I mean, where to for some of these clubs who've had women's programs for a long time? And when do our members, or when do the footy following public start to say, well, our expectations are higher now? Not necessarily we understand the players are still developing, but so are all the teams. When are we going to see a premiership? And as you noted, Brisbane, Adelaide, domination, Melbourne at the top, North to a degree, coming through the ranks now. But what's next? It's really intriguing, and I think Boxy said the finals series, if you had to script it, you could have written those scripts and then they played out in real life. It was pretty amazing. So next year, can't wait already, and I'm super pumped. And I must just before we finish up talking about AFLW, Emma Carney, the skipper herself, I mean, another All-Australian nod, just simply outstanding. Everyone talks about Jazzy Garner, Ash Riddell, Bruton, King, Randall, Sheila, all these players. And Carney's just been this solid player and solid contributor. She's the heart and soul of that team. And I'm sure it would have stung on the weekend for her, but super excited to see where that goes next year too.
Real shin bone of spirit. Like, it was something that highlighted Carney's game for me when Davidson was really coming alive, and Carney just ripped her down, and it was one of those tackles where Davidson landed on her, like on top, got straight back up, won the free kick, like, give me the ball, like, and the team just lifts from that sort of stuff. So you can just see one day, I'm sure it'll go her way and she'll be in Bree Conan's position, and the North girls will be absolutely ecstatic, jumping around for joy. But I had a little quiz, and we'll probably rip through this pretty quickly, actually, because Woodsy was actually looking it up before. So that's my bad communication. But I'm going to ask you to name the AFLW premiers and best on-ground medalists in the history. So obviously we mentioned the 8 seasons. Woodsy, close that window. And I need you two to sort of put your heads together, or you can go head-to-head. And I need, obviously there's double ups like you mentioned. So I need you to name the year and the team.
Well,
And
I wouldn't be able to name best on ground, but I think I can do the teams just because of
so you can
the order.
you can answer with either the team and the year or the best on ground medalist and the team.
So
So you can choose. So there's what is
so
there? 16
Adelaide were the
answers to
first
get.
premier, the inaugural premiers.
Adelaide 2017,
Season
correct?
one.
Adelaide Bulldogs, Adelaide,
Adelaide.
Brisbane,
Correct.
Adelaide.
So season 4 was
Correct.
Brisbane.
Yeah, so 2017 Adelaide, you got that. 2018 Bulldogs, correct. 2019 Adelaide,
And
correct.
there was nothing.
2020 nothing. 2021 Brisbane, correct.
And then it was 2020.
There was 2 seasons in 2022.
Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane.
Correct. Do you have all the medalists from 2017 Adelaide?
I feel like Erin Phillips won one.
Erin
Correct.
Phillips won
Was she season
2.
1?
She
Correct.
won 2.
So she must have been season 1 and
So
3.
she was actually my takeaway, and we won't go over it too much. We had a big segment on it a couple of weeks ago when it was announced, but probably one of the greatest players the league will ever see, one of the greatest sportsmen the country's, or sports, I shouldn't say sportsmen, that's bad, sportswomen the country's ever seen. Erin Phillips announced her retirement from AFL footy. Hung them up for the power, and just there's no real words to describe her career and what she's done for the game, but the retirement of Erin, I think, is my biggest takeaway from the year. It was amazing to see her present the medal on Sunday, and I think they had a big version of her jersey out there and a really good presentation before the grand final, and she deserves all of that. So she was the 2017 best on ground medalist.
2018 was Ellie Blackburn.
Incorrect. Strike one.
That's the only one I could think of on the doggies.
Yeah, you're taking me back here, Boxy. I'm not sure.
I did mention one of these earlier.
Brisbane's one from this year was
the captain.
Need a name.
From last week.
Brisbane, yeah.
Conan.
Brianna Conan, 2023, correct.
Skipper.
Melbourne
2022, season 7.
Oh.
Do you want a clue?
Wasn't.
Go on.
She played on the losing team, which means she played on the weekend as well.
She was a Brisbane player.
Ellie Anderson.
Incorrect.
No, I would have no idea. The only person I can think of is Dakota Davidson.
Incorrect.
So I'd go there.
She kicked Brisbane's first ever goal, I'm pretty sure. If that helps. Another senior player,
No, it does not.
Shannon Campbell.
Yep.
Okay.
You've got 2018, 2019, 2021, and 22 season 6. All of these were on the winning team.
So
Did Bates win one for Brisbane?
No.
And Anderson?
No.
I'm out
So
then.
we'll start 2018 Western Bulldogs.
just tell us.
Do you want a clue?
Katie Brennan.
No.
Ooh.
She's on a different team now.
Well, Katie Brennan still would have gone with that answer. That doesn't help Boxy.
Another Melbourne-based team won a medal during the week. Monique Conti.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yep.
Adelaide, you've already mentioned her. Got 2 of them. Erin Phillips.
Erin Phillips.
Yep.
Brisbane, Kate Lutkins, 2021.
Not have got.
Adelaide, someone I'm really high on. Dominated the prelim for Adelaide.
Oh, Hatchard.
And Hatchard. So there it is for the
Superstar.
quiz. Whip through the premiers pretty quickly.
We didn't
Medalists.
do well, Woodsy. We better
We did
work
the
on
premiers.
that.
It's just a case
Maybe
of
when
better
it's,
work on
you've got to
that.
tell me the thing of do not look this up because I'm there going, well, it's a talking point. You can't just go, I'm going to make this a quiz question. And I'm there going, well, highlighting the fact about North Melbourne actually breaking into this.
I I wasn't
Bloody
sure.
hell, Boxy.
I wasn't
Bloody
sure
hell.
how easy it would be. So I was actually going to ask you to research it anyway, because definitely
I
the
reckon-
medalist was pretty hard.
I
Maybe they
reckon
need to
next-
name the medal. Maybe it needs to be the Aaron
I
Phillips
reckon
medals.
what you got to do for the next quiz is actually just give me a topic. If Simone joins us, just give us the topic that it's going to be on. So it
So
could
we
be
can
AFL
prepare.
Premiers, AFLW
Because
Grand
you're
Finals.
hopeless.
Yeah, bloody hell. Like, you're giving me these topics that I have no idea about.
I've already got the one for next week. Hopefully,
But-
it'll be a cricket one. Hopefully, we can have Noah back in as well. The Test summer's starting pretty soon. So apologies, Mark, but I think you did pretty well in the end. So
Well, on the topic of Premiers, I think you mentioned earlier about Brisbane. Their unfortunate luck losing the Big Bash Women's, the Big Bash, the AFL and then the NRL, but there was some actually positives. Obviously, the AFLW. Queensland did win the State of Origin, but I think something that we don't usually mention, so adding 2 more titles to this Queensland-Brisbane area is
this is
the hockey one.
This is incredibly impressive as well, because this league is outstanding. And I know that hockey is not a massive sport in this country, regardless of, I really don't know why, because our national teams are incredible. But hockey one,
I just don't think a domestic competition has ever really launched.
yeah.
really
This domestic comp, though, trust me, it is really exciting. It's great quality hockey. And for Brisbane to win both premierships is very, very impressive, because that comp has, there was a lot of teams that were definitely going to contend. But yeah, the Blaze winning both, hats off to them. And again, broke that run, which I think a lot of those premierships, Woodsy, they were within a score in all of those sports. So the NRL one was some of the just, you'll never see a comeback like that again. The AFL one, obviously within a kick, Collingwood just being Collingwood. The BBL men's one, just a remarkable game.
4
And
balls left, yep.
if it wasn't for, Cooper Connolly, that doesn't happen. So the
And-
luck was nuts.
And it looks like the BBLW was last ball.
Massive scores as well, both of those
Oh.
games as well.
Might not have been last ball, I don't know.
Yeah, it came
Okay.
down to the last delivery.
Yeah.
They needed 6 off the last delivery, I believe, to win.
But
Brisbane Town's happy now.
But
So
Brisbane did have a good weekend in another sport. Unfortunately for me, or unfortunately for us baseball lovers, they had a road series win against us Aces. Taking 3 games, Aces only won the 1. Sydney were I reckon the surprise of the weekend, taking 2 games away from Adelaide, who before going into the weekend and only lost 1 game. And the Perth-Canberra series, well, that was split 1-1 with 2 games being postponed. So there's the ABL update. But looking at the stats, I know, Simone, you've actually had a look at it as well. But the ones that highlighted for me were the RBIs. There's been 10 with Josh Altman and, how do you pronounce this name? Junpei Azuma?
Azuma. I'm
Yep.
just calling him Azuma.
So you're
a
not
lot
even
easier,
attempt-
Woodsy.
Yep. The home runs looking a bit good for Melbourne with Darryl George with 3, and he joins Josh Altman as well. But, I mean, George, incredible in the first series, got 2 home runs in 1 game and blasted another one on the weekend. And then the strikeouts, and this is the one that impresses me. After 3 rounds, 30 strikeouts from Adelaide, Lachlan Wells. But I'm sure you can deep dive into a lot more stats, and being a pitcher yourself, I'm sure there's a few pitching stats that you're going to highlight to us.
Well, it's interesting. I'm looking to start with Woodsy at the standings, and you highlighted Sydney sitting at 500 at the moment, but they would be really. I think Tony Harris, the manager over there, a good mate of mine, he would be really happy to split that series. I mean, Adelaide are the clear front runners. We saw them take out, obviously, the championship last season, but sitting 9-3, and if we're talking stats and we're talking powerful offense to start with, 13 home runs. We're talking about teams who've hit, Sydney's hit 4 home runs, Adelaide's hit 13. And the difference with obviously with a home run, particularly if you got runners on base, is that you're scoring multiple runs at a time. So the home runs is an interesting one, but the strikeouts, Wells has been a a great inclusion for the Giants. They already had a pretty dominant pitching staff who were holding teams well last season, so he's been great. And I think it's going to be really interesting at this point in time. I know we're only a few series in, but who's going to beat Adelaide? I mean, that's my question. I'm an Aces fan, but I've got a soft spot. I coached the Adelaide Bite team, they were, a few years ago in the women's program at the National Championship. So I was travelling over to Adelaide and doing a little bit of work over there, and they run a really tight ship. It's a great program over there. Tank, their manager's a great guy who obviously led their team last season. But I'm just not sure at this point. You know, Brisbane and Melbourne seem reasonably close to me. I think Brisbane were probably a couple of things went their way and they ended up taking that series 3-1. It could well have been 2-2 or even 3-1 the Aces' way. But I'm not sure anyone's got the firepower to beat the Giants. What are your thoughts?
Well, an interesting fact that I looked on social media in one of the groups, ABL fans, was they were talking about the batting averages and how that it just seemed down from a couple of past few seasons, and they highlighted last season's after 3 rounds or 3 weeks, it was Bandits were on top and Tuatua, who are no longer in it, Auckland, 280, and then Geelong Korea no longer in it, 271. Giants were 270. Heat were 268. Cavalry 241. Aces 226. And Blue Sox were 214. And highlighting after 3 rounds, Giants are 263. Cavalry are 234. Heat are 234. Aces are 229. Bandits are 209. And Blue Sox are 199. So going just from that, it looks like Cavalry and Heat, but when you look at the standings, it's Bandits, and they're rated 5th on the batting averages. So it's going to be interesting. I can't see anybody matching it up to Giants from what I've seen. Bandits, maybe if they strike form, I think their season was really hard to kind of read because they faced Giants straight away. And now, I mean, you look at where they're standing, playing other teams, they may be the one to be the challengers for them. Well,
look, this weekend I think will be the interesting one. Obviously, Melbourne travelling to Adelaide for that away series. But looking at the stats, Woodsy, I mean, I mentioned the 13 home runs. So Adelaide's leading the league from a team point of view in average, just over 260. 72 runs scored, 103 hits. The closest to them is 83 hits from the Aces, and their average is well below 260. It's about 220. But then if you flip it to the defensive side of things and you look at the pitching stats, the team ERA for Adelaide's 2.3. Perth's ERA is 5.6. I mean, there's this disparity there. I mean, not only are Adelaide powerful offensively and scoring runs and just dominating through 1 to 9, they've given up the least amount of runs. They've given up 31 runs, 31 runs across 12 games, which in the ABL is like that's a pretty amazing stat to start the season with. And then you look at Melbourne's close. I mean, they've given up 37 with a 2.71 ERA, but for me, Melbourne are in the middle at the moment. Obviously, it makes sense. They're 6-6. They're, as we'd say in baseball, batting 500. And their stats suggest that that's where they should fit. Are they going to find a pitcher or two who can start to shut things down? Because they're leaking runs at the moment.
I think it's pitching and also catching. I mean, their main catcher, Tucker Mitchell, he's heading back to Texas because he's injured, and their Japanese pitcher will be leaving after this run of away series. They're playing 3 away series before the next home game. So, 3 or 4, I think 4 Japanese players won't be returning. So there's that also that has to be taken into account for the Aces. Obviously, the other teams will have a similar story, whether it's injuries or foreign players returning to their leagues. But yeah, it's the pitching side of it isn't the worry. It's the I mean, for the Aces, I think it's trying to find a catcher and then other positions where needed. But yeah,
it's intriguing. It's an intriguing season. It started off really well, but as I said, like the Aces have great potential, particularly offensively. I mean, if you looked at their lineup on the weekend, and Whitefield struggled, he struggled early and didn't play that first series. He started off a little slow by his standards and for where I think the Aces expected him to be. So if his bat starts to come alive and he's on base and he's stealing bases and getting in scoring position, Robbie Glendenning's already hit a couple of home runs this season. Darryl George is he's in the top 8 for average and he's hit 3 home runs. So they've got some firepower up the top. I think if one or two bats can come alive down the order, and that might be a Jared Dale type player that, starts to improve across the season, and then they find one or two pitchers who can slow the run scoring from the opposition, then I think Melbourne are capable. But I'm just intrigued about Adelaide. I just think they're a step above everybody at the moment. And it's nice to be at the top, but it's also nice to be the one who's hunting.
I think they're more than a step above, just because if you look at the standings, you look at, as you said, the Aces are 6-6 or 500. It's one of those things where Brisbane are 7-5, 583 percentage. Being a foreigner to all that stuff, I'm just looking at, they're sitting 2 games behind Adelaide, where it's going to be, I think, this deciding factor for the Aces. Their 3 away series will be a deciding factor in how they actually see the tail end of the season. Obviously, it's only a 10-week season, but 4 games each weekend, you've got to try and get if we can split each series, that'll be a decent effort. If we can win one of these series, it will go a long way. The expectation for this week, though, would be, let's just try and get a game. I still can't see anybody getting past Giants, but I think that's the biggest thing is, as you said, it's sometimes better to be the hunter, because you're there going, you got nothing to lose if you make a final, whereas in Adelaide, as in the AFLW, they were 9 wins, 1 loss, and they lose the prelim because of, I think, that expectation was there for them. But yeah, it's hard to predict what other teams can do it without fully seeing what teams they've actually got. And I mentioned with Melbourne, they're losing 4 Japanese players. So I think once the dust settles with that, that'll be a true indicator on seeing which teams can actually challenge Adelaide for the title.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next couple of weeks. I think that lead up to Christmas, and particularly the Aces having to go away on the road, if they can finish, come that home series that's being played over New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, if they can get there and be 500, sitting 500 in the middle of the pack, I think there's a chance post the end of the year. But, I mean, again, we want to see, and Woodsy, I'm sure you're the same, I want to see some local players, some Aussie-based players. You talked about the structure of the teams, like we're losing some Japanese players. You might get a player who comes in from a minor league club over in the States, or an independent club over in the States, or potentially in Europe, and they contribute. But the difference can be that club-based player from Melbourne who comes in and can hit, 230, 240, and score a few runs, like knock a few in, gather some RBIs, and can be a real difference maker. That to me is the intriguing part. So this conversation, I think, in a few weeks' time will be great. I think we need to get Boxy out to the Melbourne ballpark.
I definitely think.
And I'm giving a shout out to my father. I won't call him my old man. He's not that old.
No, I will have to give him a shout out after you, because there's something impressive about that.
He is the grounds manager out there and works in the operations department, and he's done a lot of work out at the ballpark, Boxy. So you'll have to come out and have a look at the great facilities we've got.
You obviously, like you mentioned, you've done a bit of coaching, family involved as well. You're not just a fan. So tell us about a baseball for you, and I guess softball. in your life if you've got a minute.
I prefer not to. I don't think I want to bore our listeners with that.
Just
What
give us
I
a
will
recap.
say is that I actually did want to give a quick shout out, and I mentioned this to Woodsy, but Extra Time were lucky enough a couple of weeks ago to go out and be at a big event. So we held a big testimonial dinner for one of the greatest players that's played baseball in this country. Her name's Shay Lillywhite. And some of you listening will be surprised that I'm talking about a female player when I say one of the greatest ever. Shay made her debut for Australia in 2001 and retired this year at the end of the 2023 Women's Baseball World Cup qualifier. Australia did not qualify for the 2024 World Cup. It's the first time they won't be at the World Cup event next year, unfortunately. But Shay, at 22 and a half year career playing for the national team. I mean, in any other sport, that'd be front page Herald Sun, or at least, if not back page, and doesn't receive the credit necessarily she deserves for a number of reasons. So I just wanted to shout out to Shay. Congratulations. We had a fantastic 80 people turned up to the testimonial. An Extra Time were there to cover, and it was a fantastic night. Woodsy, you were there.
It was, and you wouldn't have thought, but there was people saying that Shay loves baseball more than Simone, but I'm not so sure that that's true. We'll have to leave that debate for another day. But as I said, I want to mention your old man. He's gonna hate me for this if he hears this. But Saturday it was pissing down rain, absolutely puddles, I would say, at the ballpark, and looked unlikely that we would get a game. But as it turned out, Mick Wern worked tirelessly and got the ballpark looking nice and play in a good playing condition. But the amount of work that he does is a big effort. And, yeah, big shout out to Mick Wern.
Yeah, amazing. And just to finish off, I know we're moving on to some NBL chat, but to Acey Boy, the head dog out at the Aces, on guard. If you're ever watching the Aces, you will notice there's a beautiful dog out there. His name is Ace for obvious reasons, and he's guarding the pitching mound, and he's out on the field contributing, rain, hail or shine, Woodsy. So shout out to Mickey and Ace, but again, some great people out at the Aces and the Melbourne ballpark. So we'll definitely, Extra Time will get out there sometime this season and take a look, but we'll push on Boxy to the NBL.
Yeah, and obviously doing really well, the ABL, and very good pedigree, I guess, in the Wern family, and Woodsy doing some great work out at the Aces as well. So hopefully they can jump on the back of another Melbourne club in Melbourne United and bring some success, because my United Woods, they just haven't moved, mate. They are still atop the NBL ladder. About 13, 14 games through if you're Brisbane, but around 13 games through the season. Melbourne United 10-3, just 3 losses in 13 games, which is pretty good. They sit above Tasmania now, who have made the jump over Perth. So the Jack Jumpers into second spot, into that finals clinching spot at the moment. So pretty interesting there for them. They're 8-5, and they're just above Perth. And the win percentages of both those teams are actually exactly the same at 8-5. It's just a percentage. 6% ahead is the Jack Jumpers, who actually have the highest percentage in the league. So like to shoot the basketball. But Perth, despite their hot form behind their megastar Bryce Cotton, who dropped 40 on the Sydney Kings the other night, if you don't mind, they're outside the top 2, just in third. The Kings, just below them, 7-5. And then your boys, the South East Melbourne Phoenix, Woodsy, they've dropped to 5th. I think they were about the same, in the same area when we last spoke after the throwdown, which was obviously won by the better team, United. They're 5th, just above the Bullets, who have actually impressed me. They've been pretty shaky at times. I thought they probably deserved to be in the bottom 4, but they're just above that playing tournament marker at the moment in 6th. And then Cairns, New Zealand, Adelaide and Illawarra, with Tatum Senior at the helm. On the bottom. They're the bottom 4 outside of contention at the moment, and it's just 2 wins. So Melbourne with 10, Tassie with 8, Perth with 8. That's the top 3. And then Sydney, South East Melbourne, Brisbane all have 7 wins. and Cairns sit outside with 2 wins behind at 5. So all to play for in that middle chunk. United, obviously the benchmark at the moment. And I haven't brought this up this season yet, but I want to highlight some league leaders now that we're a month or so, 2 months through. And leading the league in points per game is that man I mentioned before. The 40 probably does help a little bit. It's Brycey Cotton, just almost 22 points a game, 21.7. Leading Parker Jackson Cartwright and Anthony Lamb, the Breakers duo. Assist leader is Patrick Miller from the Taipans. And rebounds leader is your man, Big Alan Williams, who I was lucky enough to see foul out in the throwdown, which was pretty good viewing for me. And then there's my big man, Joe Lawal-Achul Jr., 2 blocks a game, leading all defenders there. So heaps happening around the NBL. Another great season of competition and led by the best team in it.
Well, as I said in the ABL chat, it's better to be the hunter than the hunted. So United can kind of, you know what, you can keep top spot for now, but I know that the throwdown is next Thursday, and hopefully it might be a different story than the last one, but there's a few more weeks to go. I think we're only in week 10, this is upcoming to week 10, so there's almost another half of the season to go. So you can stay being the hunted for now, and we'll see how the other teams go.
I want to throw out a question here, and this isn't necessarily... I mean, it's somewhat relevant to this season in the NBL, but the Tassie Jack Jumpers, like if we're talking the history of new teams coming into a competition, are they one of the coolest stories?
Yeah.
From a success perspective, like if we look like this is the 3rd year in, it's pretty amazing following what they've done.
I'm laughing because this hurts Mark to talk about because the Phoenix came in a few years ago and they were quite good. The Phoenix, I remember, came in and I thought, I'm a little bit worried than another team in Melbourne. We've got a neighbour now. They're not too bad. And then the Jack Jumpers have just came in and been about 10 times more successful in less time. Which
I don't know why you're saying it would hurt me, because I'm glad that the NBL is flourishing. I'm glad new teams are coming and being successful. I just can't stand me that some of their supporters, shout out Colson, has to rub it in.
Well, and it's not just that it's a new it's Tassie.
Oh, it's great for the game. It's great for the game.
I just find that again, it's a story we don't talk a lot about, and potentially there's a reason that some people don't talk about it, but I think it's one of the stories of sport in this country that, we can, if we put our resources in and we do our planning and prepare strategically and put the right people in the right positions, whether that's off the field or the court, on the field, on the court, and you get the support from your home base, which Tassie have, they've been selling out their stadium since their inception. So that's just, to me, it's a really cool story. So I'm not a fan. I'm a long-time Melbourne Tigers fan. I used to watch the Tigers play at the Glass House when I was a kid. So I'm showing my age here, Woodsy, a little bit like you.
No, I supported the Tigers.
Old people.
I supported the Tigers as well, especially in the Andrew Gaze era, and it was something great. When they rebranded, though, something in me could not support that rebranding. So I basically went, okay, when there's a new team that comes in, I'll support that. And I've spoken to a few Southeast Melbourne supporters, and they're the same. They were like, that rebranding was club killing almost. The culture, the sense of them died in that. It was the Melbourne Tigers. It was the identity was no more. And that, as you say, it's it's something that I can remember back. You had Melbourne Tigers, you had the North Melbourne Giants and Victorian Titans, Southeast Melbourne Magic. You had that identity in the teams. Then they became Melbourne United. It was those supporters, it might have galvanised the basketball community in Melbourne, but for those casual basketball fans, it was something like that. So going back to the Tasmania, I think it's great that they've got their own identity, that they've got this unique name that I think at the start people were like, what is it? But they've been able to really capitalise, and because of basketball is a global game, they don't need to wait on the development like AFLW has, and they've been able to recruit well, marketing well, and become successful. So yes, okay, it hurts a little bit to see that they've done it, not Southeast Melbourne, but at the end of the day, the game wins.
Yep,
And they're
100%.
winning too. And like you said before, I think not only is it the coolest story, but in terms of expansion teams, to make the grand final equivalent of the sport in your first season, I think it's up there with the greatest ever in world sport. I know that, like Woodsy's saying, the NBL is in a position at the moment where a lot of it is recruiting and a lot more international talent comes over. But that first year, you can't ever forget it. They came in, weird name, Scott Roth, coach, people weren't really sure, experts weren't really sure, and they packed their stadium pretty much every single game. I remember watching it going, if I was a player from another team, I wouldn't hate to play there because, Tasmania, you're coming down, it's all brand new. They're used to it. The stadium is full. None of your fans are there. And they got whipped, but they made the NBL finals. They lost, but yeah, I remember they beat us in those semis in the first year, and I thought this can't be happening. Like this brand new team, they can't. They got no right doing this. And then they backed it up, making the playoffs again last season. It's remarkable, and sometimes you do hate giving them credit because no one likes a new kid, especially when you're fans of the teams that have been there for so long and had so much success like United has. But you do have to take your hats off to them because it's quite remarkable. They sit second once again and look like they'll definitely make the playoffs at least once again. So well done to them. And obviously, like I said, yeah, one of the best seasons we've had in a while. The talent that comes over is remarkable and just continues to be. I like saying we're moving up and up, and we're one of the best leagues in the world now. Obviously, the NBA is the benchmark, but you have American players who've grown up thinking, what college am I going to go to? That's the only chance I've got. They're bypassing NCAA and their college system to play in Australia now, and we haven't had that in a while. So that's really cool. Really cool to see Melbourne on top still as well, but anything can happen, like you said. I don't think we don't mind being hunted because we've been hunting for a few years since our last championship. So, again, all to play for, but you will notice that we don't have a scorer in the top 5 in the competition, so that's just how they play the game. United has spread it around. Chrissy Golding, my man, still doing things brilliantly, one of the best we've ever had. Woodsy hates hearing that. But, again, here's South East Melbourne in 5th, Melbourne on top, Tassie 2nd, Perth, Sydney as well in the mix. A lot to still play out in the NBL season, but in a great spot right now. If you can catch a few games, make sure you do so. It's really good quality basketball, and who knows, you might even see a celebrity. Like we said a few weeks ago, Nicky Kyrgios and John Wall were at the South East Melbourne game a few weeks ago. Maybe you could use John.
Well, it was a celebrity of the Wildcats game, apparently. I'm not sure who it was. Apparently 50 Cent was meant to be there, from what I've heard, but I'm not sure if it was him or not. But moving on, what's next?
So obviously, we won't go over this too much. We'll try and give you a proper full preview of our Test summer, but we haven't spoke about cricket for a couple of weeks. We've had a bit of a premiership honeymoon after winning that World Cup, and how remarkable that was. But we're back into it next week. Our first test of our summer officially is against Pakistan over at Optus Stadium. I'm sure that'll be packed out. It's a great deck. It's really cool to see it open our season these days. That'll be on the 14th to 18th of December, and our squad has officially been announced. So, obviously, Captain Pat, he'll lead us away. Scotty Boland, it'll be good to see him back. He hasn't played much cricket in the national team other than the Test summer, so he'll be raring to go. Bowling quite well for the Vicks at the moment. Alex Carey, Cameron Green will be in contention to play his home Test. A bit of a conversation there to be had, whether you bring him in or you keep the Bison in, Mitchy Marsh, or you have both of them and you open with someone else. A lot of conversation. I love that about cricket, how you can sort of switch around the lineup and see really anybody can play in any different way. But Joshy Hazelwood next. Obviously, the main man, Travis Head. No chance we're leaving him out. Picks himself. Usman Khawaja, much like Scotty, doesn't play much other stuff other than the whites, the red ball stuff. So he's been rested. He's made 100 for Queensland a couple of days ago, or maybe a week ago now. So he's in great form. Marnus Labuschagne, Nathan Lyon is back fit, and he is the one I'm most looking forward to watching. Obviously, he had that really heartbreaking injury in the Ashes when he was finally coming into his own there, really finding form over in England. It did let us blood Todd Murphy in Ashes conditions, which worked quite well, but I really can't wait to see the GOAT back. Mitchy Marsh, I reckon he'll get picked for his home test, and that'd be amazing as well. Considering what's happened with him and his family over the last year, I really hope he gets picked, he gets out there, and he's able to make some runs in front of the WA crowd. It'll be incredible. Another WA boy that's been picked, a bit of a bolter in the last year, Lance Morris, the wild thing they call him. Bowls express pace, Woodsy. He's been picked in the squad, so very interesting to see if they go with him. Probably one of the hardest fast bowling cartels to break into in the world at the moment, has been for a number of years. It took Scotty Boland having to take 7 at the MCG to really hold down his spot. See if Lance can do the same. Steve Smith, obviously, he's going to be in there at number 4. Mitchy Stark and David Warner, who's probably the biggest story. If you were a keen cricket fan, you probably would have seen a bit of conversation during the week between Mitchell Johnson, who is my favourite player ever, just running his mouth a little bit on, and I'm not saying he's wrong at all. I actually really liked a few of the things he was saying, not all, but just sort of bringing it up that we've sort of brushed the sandpaper thing under the rug, and David Warner requesting his big farewell tour might not be really warranted when not everybody gets that sort of thing. Along those lines, saying he's really hasn't been forgiven for that. He hasn't really been remorseful for that. He hasn't really apologised, but yet he's asking for this farewell tour like he's, a retiring legendary captain sort of thing. And he was saying he's going to retire with a lifetime leadership ban. Does he really warrant this? Should we just be playing the younger people that are coming through, which we have a lot of, openers? So a big conversation to be had there next week, I'm sure, when we do that episode. But yeah, a big talking point there. He's since been backed up by Khawaja, who said you should just pick class over form, which will be interesting because obviously
that was a big one. I was going to mention that, and I'm not sure about your thoughts, but I always was taught in sport you select on form. I'm not sure.
100%.
I'm not sure.
You have to pick the players, particularly in cricket.
Yeah.
You have to. If a batsman isn't scoring runs, why? And I find this.
He might be a nice bloke, but I'm sorry if he's not scoring the runs.
The David Warner. Just to go back to this discussion about David Warner, Mitchell Johnson, he created this narrative where it became personal. I don't really disagree with anything he said. I think he's pretty much spot on. I mean, I think, from the Sandpaper Gate stuff, there is an element where it seemed to me Smith was very upfront in taking some of the blame, whether he was actually to blame or not. Warner less so. Well, and then further to that, dictating when I'm going to retire or when I'm going to finish. I think he's been a great player for our country. Don't get me wrong, and I love cricket and I've loved watching David Warner play. But where do we draw the line with what a player gets to dictate and decide?
Yeah.
Particularly in 2023 where they're getting paid a lot of money, it's their job. It's a business. Like it's us coming to work or going to our jobs, whatever. But where I think Mitchell Johnson went wrong is it just became almost that narrative of this is a personal attack, I don't like you, and there's a history between us. If he had have kept it professional and maybe the language was a little different, we probably wouldn't be giving it the airtime we are. But that's why we love sport.
I think there's a lot of elements to it. I think you can mention Sandpaper Gate, and I think everybody's got their beliefs on it. I think there's a lot more to it than will ever be discussed, and there are people that might have stood down or whatnot behind the scenes that might have had a part to play in it. But I also think that, I know boxing, we've had a few discussions about this, about the South Africans were out to get us, because I think my suspicion is there were a lot of countries doing it at the time, and they had a lot more cameras than usual on us, so that in the moment it happens, they'll be switching it to it so they get the headlines. That's my theory. I think that we've discussed
and I think
this.
that's right. I do think, though, regardless, you should never cheat, even though they set us up potentially. And I think it just has, whether it is or not, it just has David Warner written all over it in the fact that, you just know that Smudge would have been like, look, cricket is my whole life. Being the Australian captain is my whole life, because that's what it was for him. He was the best batsman in the world at the time, one of the best captains already that we'd had, even so young into his captaincy career. He probably would have pushed back. And then the fact that they used young Cam Bancroft as a bit of a scapegoat, it's just got, Dave going, nah, they're doing it, we're doing it. Like, we're not getting any wickets sort of thing. But that's another conversation. I do think Mitch doesn't really care what he says anymore. He's not very into the media. Like, he doesn't do too much media, but when he does, he just wants to say something because he knows how it works. He's a very smart guy. A lot of people just have this perception he was just that angry fast bowler that tore apart England that one time, but he's actually a very intelligent guy, and he knows his cricket, and he's one of the best quicks we've ever had. So I back his opinion. It's not just bias because I love him. But I think you're right. A lot of what he did say is 100% correct. I think, and for context, David Warner's, I'm pretty sure he's come out and asked Cricket Australia if he can play until the Sydney Test, and then he'll retire on that one. He said, I request this as my swan song. I'm going to retire after this game. And all Mitch was really trying to do, and it came off pretty personal, I'm pretty sure all he was really trying to do was just question whether that's okay, that's a good look, that's what we do, because we haven't done that to everybody. A lot of the captains we've had, a lot of the really good players we've had, that hasn't happened to. They haven't got, you can choose when you want to play here.
I agree and disagree in some respects. I think you look back and actually see the players they've had that one last summer of cricket. Like
they didn't cheat though.
Well, irrespective, his longevity in the game is, I'm there going, does it warrant it? Yes, okay, his history, he's had that very big error on his career, but in the sense of you look back and you look at the players like Warney, Steve Waugh, Glenn McGrath. Yes, I'm putting them in the thing. Ricky Ponting, all the players that have had longevity in the game and actually had a mark, they've gone, this is going to be my last summer. But I can go the other way, and do I think he's gone on? Do I think last summer should have been what that swan song? Yes, I do.
I think and that sort of contradicts what you've said a little bit. Because I wanted to add the one thing that Mitch included in what he said, which I thought really stuck out, was he included his stats and the fact that his average lately in Test cricket is right on the edge of what a tail ender would be happy with, like low 20s sort of thing. And especially if you take out that 200, which was remarkable for sure. I was there at the MCG that day. It was 38 degrees, mega 200. But outside of that, he has made absolutely zilch. And then there's the question whether how much does the forms translate, because his World Cup was outstanding, different conditions, different form. I don't know if you trust that. But the main thing for me is we're playing Pakistan and the West Indies, two sides that you're not going to probably get them worse. I don't think they've ever been worse than they are right now. And we get them both on home soil when we've just come off a World Test Championship final win. And you know how important it is, because we've got Ashes in the future. We're going to play those better teams like in the future and in the coming years. I think it's really important, and Dave's not going to be there.
Oh, I agree.
I think
fully
we
agree
have to start playing the guy that is going to be there and finding out what that is, and what better time to do that than against nations that are at the bottom of the ladder.
Well, I'm
not saying that we're going to win anyway, so we can play anyone, but I just think that has to come into it, especially when the guy is as great as he's been, averaging under 30, under 25. Like, do you really want that? Because we've got, I reckon there's an opener in almost every state team in the Shield right now that could come in and play Test cricket for Australia in the 1 or 2 position with us. And the thing is, if you don't do that, they'll turn out like Michael Neser.
Yeah.
Or, they'll turn out like Mitch Swepson. Like, they'll get picked for the squad again and again and again, but they'll never actually play. So when they do play, they'll be 5 years back on their development when they could have been playing. I do think things, and there's so many little things we can go over next week because you could talk for ages about
I definitely think
I
you
do
can.
think if Will Pukowski, hadn't had his history with head injuries, which is far more important than cricket at all, I think he would have really taken his chance, and Dave might not have even, had this chance. But it's such a good talking point because it's, how much do you back his class? How much will his form carry over from the World Cup? Does he deserve his picking his own retirement point? Do we value the longevity of the success of the team over him?
But do we have that choice anymore? Like, I'm a sports tragic. History and longevity and, I don't know. I think in 2023, in modern sport, you can't afford, literally, because there's so much money involved. And I hate always going to the money side of it, but
it's a real thing.
Can you afford to just play someone because they deserve it, because they played for a long time? I don't think that should be the case.
I was saying my point on the longevity thing was he could actually do. I wasn't looking into the stats or whatnot because that plays another part into it, right? If he's saying, if his form's great, if his form warrants it, and he's going,
but the thing is what Box is saying. Like, the form doesn't warrant it.
No, and then it plays a different part into what I was saying. I was just saying from what I was hearing from Mitchell Johnson, it's like, hold on. Okay, yes, he's had the sandpaper gate, but it still warrants, if his form is up to scratch, he can go, well, this is my last thing. I know I'm getting on it. He's getting old, but he's actually there going, he can put time. Just like AFL footballers do, in the sense of champions call time on their career rather than the other way around.
I think if you're batting and your average is up there with the best, Woodsy, and you're still playing at that level, dictate what you like. But in this case, for the last 18 months, that hasn't been the case, and yet we're seeing him get opportunity after opportunity. I think Boxy's, I'll agree to disagree a bit, but irrespective of his form recently, why haven't we been blooding someone for his position before 2023? Because he was struggling last season.
I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it on podcasts or just in discussions with other people, but I said that David Warner a few years ago should have retired from red ball cricket and played white ball cricket.
He refused.
Yeah, I've been like, I'm a strong advocate of basically doing one or the other. Like, okay, you might have a younger player playing white ball cricket. He's great, and you've got a red baller, just pure red ball, and then the other way around. But when it comes to it, it's like David Warner, you think of the white ball. I don't know, just saying it.
Well, he started. He was never a test player. Yeah. He was a white ball player for his first 5 years, and he was nuts.
He should have retired from red ball a season or two ago. I really, truly think that, because he would have made a lot.
It was. I couldn't agree more. It was actually suggested to him as well. Like, the media, I'm sure the coaches would have just floated it to him, going, it's going to be a great time for you to have some really good. And if he did it, he could have played 5 more years.
The IPL.
Now he's going to retire both in the next 2 years because he'll just be so drained from playing both. They would have said to him, look, this is such a good opportunity to end your career like you started it, play the next 2 World Cups, because, if they were saying this a few years ago and he dropped out then, he probably could have, and then end in our T20 team, end playing for the Thunder. Like, how you came out, it matches up perfectly, and how, he's so dynamic in the one-day game, and he refused. He would not do it because he does love Test cricket. I understand you're playing for the country, there's nothing better. But he refused to do that, and it's actually, I reckon, cut a few years off his national career in the colours from doing that.
I'll go back to my point, though. It's a case of, if the form warrants it, then let them choose. And that's saying that not having his stats in front of me, I can't actually go, well, yes, I agree. Yeah, no, I don't agree. But it's one of those things.
Interesting.
Mark Woods, you don't need. I'm not going to go over the stats. I just want to finish. No. I want to finish up this discussion because I think we talk too much about sandpaper and we're talking too much about David Warner when they're going to let him play. He's going to get to play. I think
what's going to happen is he'll play. He might not make runs. Travis Head will make 200 and we'll flog them in 3 days anyway. So it won't be a story. Because I think our middle order is so good, it doesn't actually matter in this series. We saw it a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And we saw it against South Africa. The openers aren't really... And Uz is in such good form. Aussies could just reel off 100. Dave could just bat slowly and make 50. Because I'm not disrespecting Pakistan and the West Indies at all, but we shouldn't lose a test this summer. And, last time we played teams at this part of the ladder, the test ladder, a lot of them were 3-day, 4-day test matches. So I think if it was against a massive country in, the top four, England, India, towards even, maybe South Africa, definitely New Zealand, it'd be a much bigger conversation. The selectors there'd be a lot more sweat over it. But I would like to see some younger guys come in because it's a great time for it. But I reckon Dave will play, get his farewell. Whether he makes runs or not, it won't matter because we'll be winning by so much. But that's that. The first test is next. What would that be? At the end of next week, I'll say the 14th of December till the 18th. Like I said, over at Optus. So Melbourne time, obviously, will start in the afternoon for us each day, and be a bit of a day-nighter before the day-nighter if we have one this summer. Probably start around 2 o'clock each day against Pakistan, who are currently playing our Prime Minister's 11 at the moment. So they're getting warmed to the conditions. Should be pretty good. They're obviously historically, they're a very good team. Pakistan haven't been the last couple of years. They're blooding a few youngsters. They've got some great batsmen and quicks as well. So should be a good series. Just 3 test matches, that one. First one in Perth. The next one, obviously, at the G on Boxing Day. And then the SCG test, the New Year's test in Sydney. But obviously, towards the end of the show now, it's time for Aussies Around the Grounds, my favourite segment. I'm going to start with the weekly wonder, Woods, and I've actually touched down back on Aussie shores, and I've gone south to the best town in the world this week because Richmond, they won the premiership in 2017, as did my boys, the Inverloch Conwack Sea Eagles, and they want to sort of get a bit more of that formula. So they decided they're going to go down to Inverloch, have their pre-season camp, and train at the premiership factory itself, the Nest.
How many premierships did Inverloch Conwack win this year?
5 between all the grades of football and netball. So pretty good place to train, I think. It's red hot right now. Our boys went back to pre-season a couple of weeks ago. So did our girls on the netball court, girls and boys. Just in a remarkable spot, the club. And so many fans came down. So good to see. There was an awesome drone shot of the ground. Beautiful town. Voted one of the best looking towns, I think, in one of the papers around the place in Victoria. So the Tigers wanted a piece of that, and they had a good training session. They went down to Wonthaggi, a neighbouring town, and trained there today. So good to see the Tigers getting amongst the Gippsland region. Always good when AFL clubs come down to the country, but that's what caught my eye. Now over to the NFL, and I can't get enough of this. I actually had work on Monday, but I woke up at 5 anyway to watch it. I was disappointed because a few of my fantasy players went down with injuries, but that's a different story. My Seahawks played on Friday, and at my new job, I actually am parked right in front of a TV on the wall, so they obviously don't know me because that's dangerous. My Seahawks were on. They were playing in Dallas. Massive game, especially after losing to San Fran the week before. Thursday night, and it was an absolute shootout, so much so that our man Michael Dixon did not punt. He did not see the field, which obviously would be awesome, you must think, for a Seahawks fan if you understand NFL, because that means your offense is doing so well that you don't need Dicko, as good as he is. Didn't punt. Unfortunately, the Seahawks lost by a couple points, just one score in a shootout to Dak Prescott, who's my pick for most valuable player at the moment in the league, and they lost in the final moments, unfortunately. The Dallas Cowboys got over the top, but Dicko wasn't required. It was a pretty exciting game to watch. But someone who was required was Cameron Johnston for the Houston Texans in that big match against your Broncos, Woodsy. Unfortunately, the streak is over.
It was as expected, I will say, as expected.
It was a great game. Unfortunately, the Texans lost one of their star wide receivers, but Cam Johnston, Big Jono, 7 punts, 50-yard average, and 2 inside the 20, doing it beautifully, Big Jono. Lou Headley also did pretty well. His Saints lost, though. They went down to Detroit in a one-score game. Big high-scoring game, too, there. 33-28, I think the final score was. Lou had a couple punts there. Our man, the show favourite, Jordan Mailata and the Philadelphia Eagles, their run came to an end in a massive conference game against the San Francisco 49ers. So he just couldn't quite get it done. He was able to push Jalen Hurts into the end zone at one point, but yeah, that line couldn't get going, and they actually lost by about 20 points in that one. So that's a massive result for the NFC. And obviously, Adam Gotsis and the Jaguars, they lost their franchise quarterback, the Prince, Trevor Lawrence. He went down with an ankle injury. So on defense, they weren't able to stop backup quarterback Jake Browning, and they lost at home on Monday Night Football to the Cincinnati Bengals. But the other Aussies, Mitch Wisniewski, he got the win. He wasn't required too often either, but he got that win against Philadelphia, going head-to-head with Jordan Mailata. And then, obviously, Adam Falale, he didn't play. The Baltimore Ravens had the bye. But going into my rankings, I'm going to give you updates each week, each episode now, and I'll go through these quickly. I won't get you to guess them, Woods, because you had a bit of trouble doing that last week. I've had a few changes, though. And it pains me to say this because I am a Seahawks fan, and we're born and bred to not like the 49ers, a big division rival. But there is just nothing I could possibly point to that says they are not the best team in the American football competition, in the NFL, the National Football League at the moment. Offense, defense, they're just perfect on every line. Brock Purdy is playing at such a high level after being drafted last going into last season. Mr. Irrelevant, they call it. Picked number 262, I think, if might be incorrect there, but he's the starting quarterback of the best team in the NFL right now, so doing pretty well. The offense is stacked. Then the defense kept the Eagles, who's one of my favourite offenses, one of the most potent offenses, kept them to just 19 points in Philadelphia at the Link last week. So that was a massive game. They got the win. Bit of revenge for last year's NFC Championship game, which the Eagles won and advanced to that Super Bowl. So the Eagles, I've got them still in second. I still believe in them. I think Mailata and that offensive line is the best in football. Jalen Hurts is playing at an MVP level. The defense is really strong. I think the secondary could probably improve. That's obviously, it's pretty clear. They get, ripped apart with the pass. Happens quite a lot, and often because of that, they have to play from behind, which they've been fine with doing. But when you come up against a team like the 49ers, the Cowboys, I think they play next week, teams like that, the Chiefs and the Bills, they can get caught a little bit. But their rush defense is amazing behind Hassan Reddick, and they just traded as well for someone to firm that as well in Leonard from the Colts. So I think they're still up there. The Cowboys have moved up a couple spots. I have them in 5th or 6th last week, I believe, Woodsy, but they're in the 3rd spot now, and I think they're very similar to the 49ers. I just don't trust them because of their playoff record. But Dak Prescott's leading that team brilliantly. It was a shootout on the weekend, and he just did it brilliantly. CeeDee Lamb, one of the best receivers in football, I discussed last week. The defense is phenomenal, both secondary and rush defense. The linebackers are pretty good as well, so I think they'll really shock some people, and I think it's time. They say it every year. They're one of those clubs, every league has them, where they always say it's our year, we're finally going to break through. It's a bit like Carlton, but I think finally going to do it this season. I think they'll at least make the championship game. Next, I've got the Chiefs. Shock loss to Green Bay on the weekend, which absolutely nobody picked. I think they were favourites by about 6.5, 7 points. So they went down by 2 scores as well. They just could never get anything going. And Jordan Love on Sunday Night Football really came into his own for the Packers. So Mahomes and the Chiefs have lost 2 straight now. No, not 2 straight. Sorry, they lost 2 in the last 3 games. And that one's a real upset. So still have the best player in the game. Still the reigning champs. You can't put them out of it. Probably one of the best coaches, at least in the playoffs, in the competition, in Andy Reid. I think I can't put them outside the top 5. I think I said this last week, just with the insane lineup that they have on both sides. Their defense has improved. But I think if I'm to point out anything, I think losing, and it's going to sound weird because he hasn't been, a top receiver for a few years, but losing Juju Smith-Schuster and a few others on offense, and then losing their offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, to the Commanders this season has really cost them a little bit. Andy Reid's an amazing offensive mind, and we see them running heaps of trick plays. But this season they've sort of been running the ball a bit more, which we haven't seen from Kansas City in at least 5 years. Definitely not running this frequently. So that's really interesting to see without Bieniemy how pass heavy or not non-pass heavy and reliant the offense is. So I still back them in the playoffs. They'll still win games. They can still win the Super Bowl, but they're in my 4th spot at the moment. The Ravens didn't play on the weekend, but they are just behind in 5th, and I talked a lot about them last week. The defense is outstanding. They've been ripping through teams. Lamar Jackson is special. They've got some really nice young running backs and some real experience mixed with young guys on offense at the receiver position as well. Next, I've got the Dolphins, the best offensive football. Tyreek Hill is on track to break the receiving yards record for a season. He's on track to go over 2,000, which no one's ever done. They just put up points after points, another 40-plus on the weekend against Washington. In any condition, the defense has copped a couple hits with Jalen Phillips going down the week prior against the Jets. But I just back them in. I think if they can, all they have to do is just stop teams a couple times a game, and they just score so much that they can win games. Still a question mark over them in the playoffs because Tua hasn't really been there. But next I've got the Bills. And if you look at their win-loss, they're way down. And you probably question why I've got them in here at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But you've got Josh Allen. He's proven in the playoffs. He hasn't quite taken the next step. I think the offense is a lot better behind their new coordinator. Their defense is only going to get better with people coming back. And I think they can win some big games going forward. They've got the Chiefs this weekend, which is absolutely mega for both teams. Obviously, a rematch of that thrilling playoff game a couple of years ago, the best game I've ever seen. So that'll be massive as well. The next is the Lions. They haven't really moved. I spoke about them last week. Really good on offense. The defense is getting better. A lot of their games are shootouts, though, so I'd like to just see them sort of stop people a bit more. You can see that defense get back to what it was at the start of the season. But Jared Goff is, again, another person who's been through the playoffs. So I back them. They're a bit of a smoky down there at number 8. At 9, I've got my Seahawks back in the conversation. Woods, I don't know how long they'll be here because we've got a pretty tough run. We've got San Francisco, the best team in football, again on the weekend, and that is in San Francisco. So who knows if we upset them there and win that one. We're well back on track. We'll be in the top 5 by next week, don't worry. But after that, we've still got to play the Niners as well. Not the Niners, sorry, the Eagles as well. So pretty tough run for the Seahawks, but they really shocked me last Friday, keeping up with those Cowboys and really coming alive on offense, which I didn't expect, especially behind an injured Geno Smith. So that's really impressed me. They're at 9, and then, unfortunately, the team I had in 4th last week's fallen all the way down to 10, and this is how important the quarterback position is, Woodsy. We discussed this last week. Jacksonville. So they're 10th at the moment. They're only just 10th because, honestly, after this top 10, it just falls off in terms of teams, offenses, and the like. But Jacksonville were well on their way to another win, which would have rocketed them up in the conference standings. Trevor Lawrence went down, which with what looks like to me, I'm no doctor, but a pretty serious ankle/Achilles injury. It could be an Achilles tear. Could be his season done. And watching, CJ Beathard come in as the backup QB, he was okay, but the level is so much different, and the production is so much different. The big playability, the comfortability with the offense. You know, since he was drafted, Trevor Lawrence has played pretty much every single game. He started every single game since he was drafted a couple of years ago in 21. So massive, massive loss, and that offense is just, 10 times worse without him. That's just how important that position is. So it speaks everything I need to say, just how they've gone from 4 to 10 at the moment. They're still a great team, still a great defense, but they actually lost that game to Jake Browning, another backup, and the Bengals on the weekend at home. So massive loss for them. Trevor Lawrence, I hope he's okay. I'd love to see him back out there, but that's my rankings. That's my top 10 for this week. Massive games this weekend, like I said. Seahawks, Niners, another big rivalry game, and Bills and the Chiefs, which is huge as well. Cowboys, Eagles, I think, as well. So really spoiled for choice this weekend in the NFL. But also in North America, our Tillies, pride of Australia, they've been playing the Canadians at the moment as we prepare for the Olympics next year. Hasn't quite gone real well for us, though, unfortunately, guys. I think we lost that first game to a pretty solid opposition, you could say. I think Olympic champion Canadian team. But I wasn't sure what the score was.
It was 1-0.
1-0, yeah. So they're currently playing today as we record. their final game of the year, again against the same opponent.
I think they lost 1-0 today. So
Yeah, it was 5-0 was the first game.
Ah.
And the question needs to be asked. I mean, it was obvious, and I read some commentary online before the game. Gustafsson trying to find a diamond in the rough, so to speak, Woodsy, looking for that game changer, maybe the 2024 Mary Fowler that can take us, into the medals, onto the podium at the Olympics next year. But I always find it hard from coming as a player and then a coach at that elite level. There's a real importance of having some quality leadership and experience on the field with those young players. And it just seems strange to me that we had this team with no real depth. We didn't have an Ellie Carpenter, we didn't have a Razzo, we didn't have a Gorry, no Fowler, and then a heap of these new sort of a couple of debutants, and then some players who have sort of haven't played a lot, don't have a lot of caps under their belt. I found that strange, and I think if there maybe had been 2 or 3 of those more experienced players on the pitch with those younger players, I don't think the result necessarily mattered, but morally and looking at it from a team and a culture perspective, 5-0's a beating for the Matildas at the moment, given, what we've done from a World Cup perspective and, how we're progressing and pushing and we've got this great momentum. That just seemed like a strange... I don't know what you guys think, but watching it, I was really surprised.
Straight away, on Instagram, you see the lineup, and for that first game, I was reading through and I'm like, where's all the senior players?
Or even just where's one or two of them to sort of help bolster, particularly defensively.
You're exactly
right. It didn't
right,
make sense. And
how much more comfortable would you be as that player that might not have played in a while, or that debutant, having 1 or 2 of the players that went through the World Cup?
100%, yeah.
And it makes you better. There is something to be said of just, dropping people into the fire. But I think, you've got to have 1 or 2, especially in a team sport like that, against such a good opponent like Canada have been. So, very interesting. But, like Woodsy just updated me then, 2 games, 2 losses for the Tillies in Canada, unfortunately.
But on a positive note for the Matildas, they have taken out the Don Award, which is the athlete or team who, by their achievements and example in the last 12 months, have most inspired the nation. So they've joined the likes of other female athletes and teams, the Australian women's cricket team, Michelle Payne and Ashley Barty and Sally Pearson, just to name a few. So it's good to see them getting recognised on that level. Well,
and you heard, for those of you who listen at SEN and probably one of the best in the business, Jared was listing his top 10 moments in Australian sport in 2023. And when you hear that the men's World Cup victory in India was second, when I heard that, I thought, hang on, he's got this wrong. And then when he said the Matildas won, and obviously they didn't win the World Cup, but I agreed with his list, and I thought it was a great list. But what the Matildas have done is just brilliant this year. I want to mention too that it was Kaya Simon who was at that awards dinner who accepted that award. And there's another story, and we'll come back to this one. We'll revisit this another time. But she's an interesting one. I mean, she's back playing in Australia. She's suffered some pretty significant injuries. She's been around the program a long time. They took her to the World Cup thinking, well, maybe she might take a penalty shot. She probably wasn't going to play a lot of minutes. Is she on the outer now? Is there a way for Kaya Simon to get back? She's one of the most famous names in the Matildas' history, I would suggest. She's an interesting story. It was really good to see her accept that award. She's a big name in women's sport, particularly representing the Indigenous women's sports people in this country. But that's an intriguing one for me. So that's a one to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely interesting, especially when, the mantra might be with the coaching at the moment to bring in a lot of young players as frequently as possible. And that's just the beauty of sport. Every coach can do things whatever the way they want, and every coach has their different definition of success and how you sustain it. So definitely one to watch. But, I mean, hopefully But yeah, if that mantra is how they're going to go for the foreseeable future. It might be very hard, but that award is just phenomenal. And the Matildas in the World Cup, I mean, it just every single thing that you mentioned that award was about is every part of them. It describes them beautifully, and they sit with some pretty remarkable company, like you mentioned, Woodsy, and some even better company is the company we've had today with you guys viewing. We'll be back next week, like I mentioned, and we'll have a massive preview of the Test summer along with Aussies Around the Grounds and a few other segments on all of the other sports around the place. Make sure you catch as much sport as you can over the weekend, and we'll be with you next week.